Fresh and untitled.
Because you have a lot going on right now. You have One of Us Will Be Dead by Morning.
Yeah, that's the new Hater book, yeah.
You're working on the Hater movie.
Yeah.
The script.
Yeah.
The Front, World War II zombie series.
Indeed, yeah.
And then Top Secret book.
Yeah, well, that's not quite a book. I can't say anything about it yet, but there's a lot of people involved. It's a top secret project, we'll say.
And then the Spaces Between.
Yeah, which is big and taking a long, long time.
So when you have a lot of stuff like that going on, is it easier or harder to write?
That's a really good question. I think it's easier. I'm not a great believer in writer's block.
No.
I don't think I don't think writer's block exists as such. I think what stops people writing is not being in the right zone, in the right frame of mind, and not having the idea ready to work on. So I like to have a lot of projects like that. For a long time, I wrote full time, but last year I went back to an office job as well, because for loads of reasons. Partly the fact that sitting here in my office all day on my own every day was doing my brain in, and I was thinking, how do I write about people and make them realistic if I don't know any anymore? So I went back to do an office job, and I thought, well, my writing is really going to suffer here. But bizarrely, the opposite has happened. Emma seems to have disappeared and turned into a still picture.
I don't know. Yeah. She's probably getting another beer. I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought.
Bloody internet stopped again. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got you.
Fucking Irish internet. I swear to God, that's ridiculous. The two of you have just been still screened for the last 10 minutes, and I'm like, should I say something or should I just let go?
What I think is weird is that
Unreal.
Suzanne, your picture has been like crystal clear for the whole thing. No juddering, no delay, anything at all. And Emma, you're like a couple 100 miles away from me, and you're just pixelated to hell.
Yeah, it's the Irish internet. So your writing didn't suffer when you went back to your job?
No, perversely, it really helped. And I think one of the things that helped was the fact that at the moment I know that I get home in the evening and I've got from whatever time, about 6 o'clock to about 10 o'clock to write, and it really focuses me, because I haven't got all this stuff going on. And there are, some of these are things that I'm doing because I want to do them. Other things are signed deals or deals that are going to be signed. So there's a new pressure. But it's a good pressure. I think working full time at writing, I'd become sort of aimless to an extent, and it's so easy to procrastinate and go down the wrong route. But when with the pressure of having a limited period of time each day, I've just found it personally very beneficial. I don't know if that would work for everybody, but for me, yeah, it helps to have a restriction. It helps to think about it more as a job, with hours of work.
The one thing that I've always wondered about is people that they set this word goal, like I'm going to hit 2,000 words a day. And for me, I don't understand that, because they can be terrible words. Yeah. Like if you're just typing them to get this goal out, I would rather have 500 really solid words than 2,000 words that when I read them the next day, I'm going to be like, no, that can't use any of that. So I think when you do have that pressure, like you said, for me, it's distraction. Like I take courses and I work on probably 2 or 3 different books at one time, and just really try and keep, because it makes your mind more flexible. Like, because I write in so many different genres like you, it's like I'm not going to stick with zombies. I'm going to do sci-fi, and I'm going to do a little bit of urban fantasy, and okay, let's write this story that I see listed just for fun. Like, and I think it's better that way for a writer to be diverse, to be able to write in multiple genres, and to kind of exercise your brain in that way, and not limit yourself.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But on the subject of word counts, it's something that I do use, and I know that a lot of writers, as you say, yourself included, it's not something that works for you. But I like to say I'll write 1,000 words on the new Hater book per day, but I won't beat myself up if I don't do that. I just know that I've got this period of time to write a book, however many months. I know I've got to get it in by April, so I know that I want to get this draft finished by the end of December. And to do that, I need to write about 1,000 words a day. So really, it's just a guide for me. Like I say, I don't beat myself up, and I certainly don't sit there. If the words aren't flowing, the words aren't flowing. And I don't think there's anything you can do about that. I think that's very different to writer's block, having just dissed writer's block a short while ago. But I think if you're not in the right mode, if you're not in the zone, if something's happened and it's putting you off, you can't force words out, because as you say, you'll just end up deleting them. You'll just end up going back and rewriting. But I think with a first draft, there is an element of just getting it out, just getting it down for me, because I find that with a first draft, I think probably 99.9% of it gets thrown away. For me, the first draft is another part of the planning process, and it's only when I get to the second draft and further drafts that the book really falls into shape.
Character and plot, they're very similar. They're very close. Pacing is also pretty important for me when you're reading a story. And like I said with you, I just reread Trust, so that's like the freshest one in my mind of what you've written. And like I said, within 3 pages, I want to know what's happening with your main character. I want to know what this plot is. I mean, I want to know what's going on with his roommate, his girlfriend, like everything. Like, and you accomplish that within 3 pages, and you manage to keep up a pace that I was talking with an editor friend of mine that it's very important when someone's reading your book that, you know, they look at when the next chapter is, and if it's like 30 pages away, they're like, no, I'm just going to put the book down.
Yeah.
When you write, when I read your books, I don't even bother looking when the next chapter is. I'm just turning the page because that pace is there, and you manage to keep that pace consistent throughout the book, like from page 1 to end. And I'm actually very curious now, knowing that since you start at the end, how you do that.
Well, I would say that starting at the end isn't a hard and fast rule. It's just what tends to happen. So pace, that's a really good question, because I think every single book I've written, at some point, there's been a review, whether that's Amazon or elsewhere, where people have said it starts slowly and ends faster. But I think that you have to maintain a steady pace. You have to stay in the same gear. And it's the story that accelerates, not the pace of telling it. Does that make any sense at all? I don't think it does. But
plot. So for you, plot is pace.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of my question. Is it like the characters that set the pace, or the plot? So for you, it would be the plot.
I think it's the plot, yeah. And again, I think a lot of that is because I'm writing about ordinary people who are, to an extent, that they're driven by the events that are happening around them. So the people that I write about will never have any influence on the larger things that are happening in the book. For example, Tom in Trust, there's absolutely nothing he can do to stop these aliens being here, stop them doing what they're going to do or not going to do. The story is about how he deals with the situation. So, yeah, it's very much driven. The pace of the novel is driven by things that aren't necessarily in the character's control.
And do you like to throw things in that, like, because you were talking about Hater, but like I said, I just thought of something in Trust. I remember when I read it, I had actually wanted to ask you.
Yeah. There's
a scene, I'm not going to ruin it for people that haven't read it, where he talks to one of the aliens, and it's a very nice conversation, directions. And you kind of get the impression that might lead to something, because this alien doesn't act like the other ones, and so on and so forth. But then the plot kind of veered off after that, and then you find out these different things. And I was just wondering, do you like to kind of, I guess to call that like a red herring or something like that, and you kind of, you don't do it like some writers, it's like, oh, I'm going to put a red herring in every other page just to throw off the reader. And it's like, after a while, it just kind of gets tedious. But, you kind of sprinkle them sparingly. And do you find that better to help with keeping people in line with your characters and your plot and the pace.
I think one thing about people and aliens, I guess, and zombies in general, is that every character in every book, I believe, well, certainly in the books that I write, they believe that what they're doing is being done for the right reason. You know, I guess Adolf Hitler thought that what he was doing made sense, and then it was okay. And I'm sure that, you know, everybody who's involved in all the conflicts around the world at the moment, everybody thinks that they're right and everybody else is wrong. So, I mean, with that particular scene in Trust, I think it was there really just to illustrate that at that stage, the aliens are as vulnerable and as lost, really, as Tom, the main character, is himself. So,
Right.
so I guess it is a red herring, but it's kind of a logical red herring, and it's not so much intended to throw people off the scent as to show later on that the aliens were as innocent as the people that they, you know, the humans that they were mixing with. I'm trying not to say too much about the story here, but
This is another question that plays into the plot one, and this is something I want to know kind of for myself, a little bit selfishly, is how do you know when you have the plot right? Which probably sounds really vague, but what I mean by that is, what do you see a lot of new writers fall into pitfall-wise? Like, what do they focus too much on? What do they not focus enough on? Like, when you have a plot, I understand it goes from plot A to B. I know when I like a book and I know when I don't like a book. But as a writer, how do I know when I have the plot right? Like, what is that?
I think we've probably touched on a couple of aspects of this. For me, it's just a gut feeling. And for me, it's when I've got a story that I want to know, that I want to hear about. Because if I haven't got that, or if I know that I'm just mimicking somebody else's story, then I don't think I could write it, to be quite honest. I've got to stay engaged with the book all the way through the writing process. Pitfalls to avoid, again, I think we've already mentioned one, and that's going back and retrospectively adapting things to make them fit, like R2-D2 flying in the second Star Wars film. And for me, really, it's steering away from cliches, but also following the logical progression of the story, because you can steer away from cliches and then intentionally write the exact opposite of what everybody else has written, but that's not necessarily going to be a good story, because that's not being informed by the characters or the plot. That's you consciously trying to do something different to everybody else. So again, pretentiously, I would say it's about just following your gut and just trying to be logical with the story. I like to the way that I approach the things that I write about, they're generally apocalyptic, they're generally horrific, but I try to write them from not a sensationalist point of view. This is the shit that's happening. Let's just deal with it. Let's see how it goes.
I will do probably for my main characters, usually I have like 2 or 3, and I will go a couple pages, like hair color, eye color, blah, 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 all this. What they're like, what their backstory is, what they've been through. But I probably usually won't go any further than that, and they grow themselves in it. And then I'll put notes back in as I'm writing, like, oh, remember that he does this often, like picks his nose or I don't know, whatever. You know, or says a certain word a lot. You know, I'll just remember that he does this, and I'll add that to it. But how in depth do you go into the characters? Do you have like a whole big like nearly a character map beside your plot map as well, or?
I'm quite bare bones, I think, because again, I tend to find the characters as I'm planning and writing the first draft of the story. Just this evening I was doing some work on the Hater book, and just writing a scene with the main character who's separated from his wife geographically, not in terms of relationship, and I've got a kind of an idea of how the wife character develops, who's going to be seen more in the second book. And I know what this guy that I'm writing about, because I've been writing about him for a few months, I know what he's like. But just thinking about the two of them together and a certain piece of dialogue I've written has just made me look at the whole relationship in a different way. So it's really, as I go through, the broad brushstrokes kind of reveal themselves. I really don't go into huge amounts of physical detail. I steer well away from that, because I think I've already said that for me, what's important in these books is writing about people that the readers can identify with. And I think that as the more vague that you keep things in terms of physical appearance, the easier it is for somebody to build up an impression of someone in their head. No, I don't think I've ever written, here's my main character, he's so many feet tall and he's got blue eyes, blonde hair, etc., etc. I might reveal little details as we go through the book. Like he touched his balding head or whatever, something like that. But generally, I try and leave the appearance of the characters for the readers to work out for themselves. So I think if you automatically build up an impression of what a character looks like when you start reading, and if you then get to a bit of description from the author which kind of contradicts what you've been thinking, again, that can throw you out of the story to an extent.
Wouldn't it be a bit of a thin line to do that, though? Not to give like even hair color or something like that? Isn't it like a bit of a shaky standing?
I don't think so.
In a way.
I don't think. Maybe it's just me because I'm an ugly old bugger and I don't think much about appearances. So for me, it's not an important thing. If there's a character who's particularly vain, then maybe I will give more details. But then I won't necessarily talk about what they look like. I'd talk about that there's a character in this Hater book and they're on an island and she's waiting to go home, waiting for a ferry, and she's there in her high heels and all glammed up and everything because she knows that she's got that's the appearance that she's got to project when she gets back home, if she gets back home. So when the appearance is important to the character traits, then I will go and describe it. But generally, I do keep it that vague. In fact, I'm struggling now to think of any book where I have specifically explained what the main character looks like, or any of the major characters. I do just tend to leave it up to the reader's imagination.
I actually prefer that because I have a vivid imagination. So when I'm reading a book and someone does say he's 5'11" with blonde hair and blue eyes, I'm like, okay, that's not how I pictured him, like at all.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in school, my teacher always said, like, you have to like tell us who these people are so that they're definitive and all this. For the people who don't have the imagination to build the person up in their head. Yeah. So, like, 'cause that kind of stuck with me, at least say, like, blonde hair or whatever, just so they know, all right, so she's got blonde hair, and then they can build from there, kind of.
Again, it's something where there's no right or wrong, is there? And like I said before, it's what works for me. And I've found that this is what I naturally do, and this is what works for me. But yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, there are plenty of people who don't like my books who might not like them because they don't get a full description of the physical attributes of a character, because it's different strokes for different folks, I think. And for me, it works not to be too descriptive.
I think the less that you tell people what to think, the more they actually, because I wrote this story once and I never wanted to describe the person in it because it was first person, so I wasn't going to talk about myself, like, oh, my beautiful brown hair. You're not going to say something stupid like that. So I never mentioned this person. I remember talking to a few people who had read this, and I said, who did you think this person was? What had you built up in your mind as to who this person looked like? And they nearly came up with exactly what I had in mind while writing it. And I think the less rules you follow and the less strict lines you follow, the more you're like, what's in your head actually shows on paper. Yeah. If that makes any sense. No, so like, I mean, I wasn't telling anybody what to see or what to believe. They came up with the exact image I had in my head when I was writing it. And even like the location and stuff like that, they were able to say, yeah, that bathroom reminds me there. And I say, that's exactly the bathroom I'm thinking of. So
that's brilliant. And isn't that a great thing as a writer when somebody says that when you talk about a scene with somebody and they get it as you got it? I was fortunate enough to have a book filmed many years ago. It's a shit awful film, but they still made it. And I just remember the feeling when I first walked onto the set of it was autumn when I first walked onto the set of the farmhouse, and it was exactly as I'd envisaged it. And I thought, wow, you've got all this from the description or lack of description that I gave you in the book. And that's a great thing. Another big writing cliche that everybody talks about is show, don't tell, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And I think that is really key with character descriptions and scenery descriptions to an extent. I think that the last thing that I'd want to do is have a big chunk of exposition at the beginning of each chapter saying Johnny was 15 years old, he was this tall, he did this, he did that, he went to their house that had a number 25 over the door, that kind of thing. I'd like to give those. If I do give those details, I just want them to be like casually dropped in, because then I think it becomes subliminal, and that's, I think, what you were talking about, Emma, where the reader gets it when you're kind of guiding them to build up the same impression as you.
I can understand people that want, like what Emma was saying, that description, but then there's other people that, it's okay to be vague and, lead them, give them hints, the reader, and it engages them. It pulls them more into the story when they imagine it in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Does it have to be all about them? Do you know, that to me sounds like a character-based storyline, whereas my stories normally come from, say, like, I'll have a dream and like, that was amazing, I'm going to write that. And it has nothing to do with the person in it. It has to do with what actually happened. So my story is about the story. And I don't want to be bogged down with this whole major metamorphosis this gobshite's going through. He's only here to help me tell the cool story. I get that you have to give some, like, love to the character and make him, like, lovable or hateable or whatever. But I think that the whole, what your editor had been saying, like, that they have to have, something has to completely happen to them. It's like, I don't care about what happens to them. I want to talk about this really cool world that I see in my head and this, like, apocalyptic disaster that's going on in the background or something like that. I think of, like, this whole, like, character arc or whatever, I think Jane Austen, I think Pride and Prejudice, I think Sense and Sensibility, where, like, they start off and it's like, oh, they really want love and the man is right there, but that man is too, like, proud, i.e. Pride and Prejudice, like, she's got her pride and he's got his pride and she's got her prejudice, like, and they have to work through this and realize it's all right there, and it's like, that's okay and it's good, and I do like Jane Austen, but I mean, how many times can it be done and still be new when it's only character based? It's kind of what.
I do completely agree with you. The focus of my stories is always the story, as you're saying, the big event, the apocalypse that you want to describe. But I use the characters and what they're going through as the device through which to tell that. I think it keeps it more focused, looking at it from maybe one person or a group of people's perspectives. So, I'm not really interested in whether they've grown as a person as a result of living through the apocalypse. I just want to see what the apocalypse looks like from their point of view. Yeah.
We're pretty awesome, I think.